This Tech Gear Talk is sponsored by Dashlane. If you're tired of having to reset your passwords every time you forget them, it's time to use Dashlane. What's up guys, Sagi here, and welcome to another Tech Gear Talk. Today we're going to check out the Canon 90D. This new 32 megapixel camera from Canon was released earlier this year, and it replaced the super popular 80D. And this was an interesting move by Canon, and it showed us that they believe there's still room in this mirrorless dominant market for DSLRs. I've been using it for a few months already, and right off the bat I'm going to tell you that I really enjoyed the overall user experience. I'm going to walk you through a detailed review, show you some sample photos and video footage, and then talk about who I think this camera would work for. At $1,200, the 90D is in direct competition with cameras like the Sony a6400, the Fuji X-T30, and even the Canon RP. The 90D combines Canon's latest 32 megapixel APS-C sensor, fantastic image quality, great handling, and some very cool features like face detection with an optical viewfinder. This camera has a similar but not identical set of features to the recently released M6 Mark II, and I'll publish a comparison video once I'm finished with the detailed reviews. I'm going to cover what I liked and what I didn't like about the 90D and try to help you decide whether this camera could be right for you. I'm going to very quickly go over some overall key features in case you're just starting your research. The 90D features a 32.5 megapixel APS-C CMOS sensor and the newest Digic 8 processor. It uses a 5481 point dual pixel autofocus system when using live view, and a 45-point all-cross type autofocus system when using the viewfinder. It has a 3-inch 1.04 million dot fully articulating touchscreen and an optical viewfinder with 100% coverage. You can record 4K 24 and 30 frames per second video. It can shoot full HD or 1080p at up to 120 frames per second for slow motion, but with some limitations that I'm going to discuss later on in this video. We've got a 3.5mm mic input and a headphone jack, in-body 1080p and 4K time-lapse, Wi-Fi and Bluetooth for remote control and easy file sharing, and finally the 90D offers digital image stabilization that can work together with lens-based IS. Alright, now that we got that out of the way, let's dive in deeper and talk about the good and the bad. And I want to start out by talking about the sensor and the processor. The 90D uses Canon's latest 32.5 megapixel APS-C sensor, and that's a ton of pixels to pack into a crop sensor. The sensor has a native ISO range of 100 to 25,600, which could be expanded all the way up to 51,200. The image quality and autofocus, which I'll touch on later on, have been absolutely outstanding. The 90D is a very good option if you're shooting portraits, landscape, lifestyle and street photography, or even a good vlogging or travel camera if you're not bothered by the larger size. Overall, I really like the images right out of the camera. The JPEG color processing is just what I expect from a Canon camera, and I'm super happy with the additional 8 megapixels of resolution. As far as dynamic range, the 90D performed pretty well. I wouldn't say it's industry leading, but I was very happy with what I was getting for the price. Moving on to the processor, Canon is using its latest and most powerful processor, the Digic 8, which adds a lot of power to the 90D. First, simple operations like startup, going from shooting to preview mode, or just in and out of menus and selecting features or settings is very fast. And I'll show you an example of startup time. So the camera is off right now. I'm going to hold down the shutter. You can see it's not doing anything. I'm going to turn it on, and that's how fast it turned on, got focus, and took a picture. Now moving on, if you watched any of my reviews before, you know that one of the things that I look at in every camera that I test is continuous or burst shooting. And this lets me just hold down the shutter and the camera will just keep on firing. This is a great feature when I'm photographing kids running around, if I'm at a sporting event, or if I'm trying to photograph one of my dogs running around, or any times when I'm shooting a fast-moving subject. The 90D can shoot at up to 10 frames per second with full AI server AF when using the viewfinder. So I'm going to go ahead and get focus and then hold down the shutter. That's pretty fast. This is going to work well for most people, but if you're looking to primarily shoot sports or fast-moving objects, you may want to look at an option that gives you even more frames per second. As far as the buffer size, we're looking at 58 images when shooting JPEGs and 25 images when shooting RAW. I'm working on a couple of follow-up videos and tutorials that have to do with my video settings and low light shooting and a few other things, so if you're interested, make sure that you're subscribed and that you have notifications turned on. And if you have anything else that you want me to cover in future videos, just let me know in the comments section. From a video standpoint, the 90D can record internally up to 4K 30 frames per second with a 30-minute limit, and up to 4K 30 frames 8-bit 422 externally using the clean HDMI out. Both formats give you fantastic footage and a ton of color info to work with when you're grading your footage in post-production. Finally, having a clean HDMI out also means that the 90D can easily be used for live streaming with continuous autofocus. One thing that I would have really liked to see at this price point is C-Log for a more flat image profile, which could be useful for color grading. Okay, let's move on, and I say this a lot, but one of the most important things to me with every tool that I use is ergonomics, and that's in terms of both handling and user interface. And it's something that I think a lot of people overlook when they're choosing a camera. The 90D is extremely comfortable to hold. The body is, of course, larger than most mirrorless cameras, and there's a super deep grip. For longer shoots, and specifically with larger lenses, it feels well balanced, and I never felt like I was gonna drop it or like it was gonna slip out of my hands. It actually almost felt like I was using one of my 5Ds, but with a deeper and more comfortable grip. Now, as technology advances, manufacturers are able to make certain components smaller, but I think it's important to strike a balance between performance, ergonomics, and portability. Overall, this is a very solid and well-built camera, and I like that it's weather sealed, which offers protection against dust and moisture. I used it when I traveled and on the beach, and it's nice to know that I have an extra layer of protection. On the other hand, it's definitely on the bigger and heavier side, so if you like what you've seen so far, but portability is a priority for you, check out the Canon M6 Mark II. Going back to the 90D, there are plenty of buttons and dials, so you can control most of what you need without ever having to go into the menu. Just like on my 5D, there is a dial up top and a ring on the back, which you can use for aperture and shutter speed. One feature that I really liked is the multi-function lock on the bottom right. I could select which of the buttons and dials I want to lock. So for example, when I'm shooting video, I want to make sure that I don't inadvertently change the shutter speed. So I went into the setting and selected the shutter speed dial and then locked it. And then I can feel comfortable that if I'm shooting video and I'm trying to change the aperture and I inadvertently reach for the wrong dial, I know that it's locked and it won't change until I unlock it. Moving on, there is also a new joystick that Canon calls a multi-controller. And this new joystick is positioned higher up on the body, and it's really convenient for adjusting the position of the autofocus point. On the left side, you'll find the mode dial, which lets you very quickly go from manual to aperture or shutter priority, plus bulb scene and a few other auto and custom options. I like that you have to press the mode dial lock release button in order to change the setting, so again, you don't inadvertently rotate this dial. In the center on the back, we find the Q button, which brings up Canon's quick menu on the LCD. This is one of my favorite features about Canon cameras, and when coupled with the full touchscreen, I find that it provides the best user experience of any brand. You can also bring up the quick menu by clicking the Q on the top right of the LCD. Now, while you can't customize this menu, it definitely provides quick access to the most used functions of the camera. When you do need to go into the main menu, you do so by clicking the menu button on the top left. Again, Canon's menu system is super simple to learn and use, and it's definitely a reason why I often recommend Canon for beginners. Moving on to the battery, the 90D uses the LPE6N lithium-ion battery, where one of the advantages of DSLRs is higher battery life ratings, and in this case, 1,300 shots per charge. On the right hand of the camera, we have a barn door covering the SD card slot. I love this placement because it means that I don't have to take the camera off the tripod to remove or replace the SD card. On the left side, we have covers for a micro USB for file transfer, an HDMI port, as well as a mic input, headphone jack, and remote control port. It would have been nice if we got USB charging or the ability to power the camera continuously using USB, but instead there's an option to do that using a coupler for uninterrupted power. Moving on to the bottom of the camera, we have the battery compartment, which again is placed in a position that allows me to switch batteries without having to remove the 90D from my tripod, and that's a big bonus for me. the pentaprism type optical viewfinder offers 100% frame coverage, and it includes autofocus points in mode, compositional grids, and a few other assistive features. What's pretty unique about this optical viewfinder is that you can still use face detection, which is something that's usually reserved for electronic viewfinders. It doesn't cover the entire sensor, but worked pretty well for me when the subject was inside the allotted zone, and was definitely a feature that I used when I shot portraits with the viewfinder. Before I get to image quality, I want to thank Dashlane again for sponsoring this video. Dashlane is a free mobile and desktop app that I've been using since 2013 to save all of my passwords and other sensitive information like credit card and account numbers. The reason that I started using Dashlane was that I was always either forgetting my passwords or having to use generic passwords for multiple accounts, and I liked the fact that Dashlane was free and no credit card was required to use it. Now all I have to do is remember my master password for Dashlane and I'm all set. Dashlane securely stores all of my information and generates super strong passwords for me with all those crazy characters. And I don't mind because I don't have to remember them and Dashlane just autofills them for me. So click the link in the description and download Dashlane for free on your first device. And for as long as you see the link, you'll automatically get a 30-day free trial of Premium. Again, no credit cards required at sign up. Now moving on, I want to talk about resolution, frame rates, and image quality. For stills, the 90D has a maximum image resolution of 6,960 by 4640, which is quite an improvement from the traditional 24 megapixel 6,000 by 4,000 resolution, and will be plenty for what most people would ever need and will give you some additional flexibility when cropping. It can of course shoot both JPEGs and RAW, and you can decide just how much information you want to capture depending on what you plan on doing with the images in post-production. The image quality for stills was excellent, and I would say it was as good as any mirrorless or DSLR APS-C competitors at this price range. The images were crisp with fairly good dynamic range and outstanding JPEG color processing. Skin tones appeared natural, and I really enjoyed shooting portraits with this camera. Of course, if you're shooting RAW, this isn't a big deal for you, but I like to be able to use shots right out of the camera with maybe a slight edit for quicker social media posts. This means that I usually shoot both JPEG and RAW so that I have both options available to me. Now for video, if you're shooting in NTSC, the 90D can record 4K video at 24 and 30 frames per second, and Full HD at 24, 30, and 60 frames per second. In PAL, you can shoot 4K at 25 and Full HD at 25 or 50 frames per second. Now, initially the 90D did not offer 24 frames per second in 4K or 1080p, but Canon listened to its users and with a recent firmware update added both options. There's also a high frame rate movie mode which lets you capture Full HD or 1080p at 120 frames per second for slow motion. The image quality is very good, but there is no continuous autofocus, no image stabilization, and no audio in this mode. I can live without the audio and without the stabilization, but the lack of autofocus makes this feature almost useless. We have the standard 30-minute record limit in 4K and 1080p, which is the industry standard, or you can choose to record externally via the clean HDMI out. The 4K footage from the 90D was nice and crisp, and I like the fact that there is no additional crop like on the M50, SL3, and various other Canon cameras. This makes it a lot easier to get wide-angle shots when shooting in 4K. I'll do a comparison video with other cameras in this range, and I'll discuss how this footage compares to the various other options. Overall, it's very good, but probably not quite as detailed as the A6400 or the XT30 if I'm pixel peeping. Going to 1080p, I think that I prefer the 9D footage to that of the A6400, and it's probably on par with the XT30, which, if you watch that review, is saying a lot. I have a dedicated video discussing the pros and cons of shooting in 4K, so if you're interested, I'll link to it up in the corner and in the description so you can check it out after this video. And I mentioned this before, but it would have been really nice if Canon added C-Log to the picture profiles. Alright, next let's talk a little bit about autofocus. With the 90D being a DSLR, we have two different autofocus systems. One for the viewfinder and another one for the LCD using live view. When using the viewfinder, the 90D employs a 45-point autofocus all-cross type system that is pretty similar to what was available on the 80D, but with a higher res metering sensor that has 220,000 pixels rather than the 7,560 on the 80D. And this new metering system allows the 90D to have subject recognition and therefore face detection when shooting through the optical viewfinder, which is really cool. Now, if you've been using a mirrorless camera, the 45-point system is still going to feel limited when compared to an electronic viewfinder. And this is where you may choose to use the LCD with live view. With the LCD, we're using the dual pixel autofocus system, which covers essentially the entire height of the sensor and 88% of the width with 5,481 points. In addition to the improved accuracy and coverage of the system, we're also getting eye detection. Now, overall, the autofocus system using live view was more accurate for me. When shooting landscape or doing street photography, that wasn't terribly important to me, but when shooting moving subjects, I found that my hit rate was a lot higher when using the LCD, and I ended up using it even though I was getting 7 frames per second instead of 10 when using the viewfinder. Ultimately, even for portraits, I prefer to use the LCD because it offered eye detection rather than just face detection. When there are multiple faces on the shot, the 90D will prioritize the closest one to the camera, but you will see arrows to the left or the right, which will let you easily use the joystick to switch which face is in focus or which eye is being tracked. All in all, face tracking worked well when I was using it for portraits, and as I mentioned, the added eye tracking and more complete coverage when using the LCD was a big bonus. Moving to video, here we're exclusively using the dual pixel autofocus system. I have nothing but good things to say about this autofocus for video. It was reliable and consistent and without any type of hunting. Face and eye detection for video is good even in lower light situations, and the 90D easily tracked the face even when the subject was moving through the frame. In addition to face and eye tracking, Canon also offers subject tracking, so you can just click on any subject in the frame and it will be tracked as it moves around. The user interface using the touchscreen is very user-friendly, and it's one of my favorites in terms of responsiveness and accuracy. Another feature that was great about the 90D is that it uses a dual pixel autofocus system even when you're shooting in 4K. Some older models like the M50 and the SL3 switched to a contrast detection system when you were shooting in 4K, which was slower, less accurate, and struggled in low light situations. The 90D has none of those issues in 4K, and the autofocus worked great. One other feature that I really liked is the ability to easily rack focus from one subject to another by clicking on it using the touchscreen. I like the fact that I can talk about one thing while I have it in focus and then click on another item as I want to shift the user's attention to it. So to recap my opinion about the autofocus, it worked really well for me for both stills and video, but I found that the live view option using the LCD worked even better for me. All right, let's move on to lens options for the 90D, and I think a lot of people forget to look at this part when they're shopping for a camera. When I test cameras, I like to use a variety of lenses at different price points to help give people a true feel of what they should expect from the camera. What's great here is that the 90D natively accepts EF and EFS mount lenses, which means you can use anything from entry-level EFS lenses all the way to the best L series Canon glass. There are also a lot of very good options from third-party providers, which includes my favorite lens, the Sigma 18-35 f1.8. One thing to remember is that because the 90D has an APS-C sensor and not a full-frame sensor, there is a crop factor of 1.6x, which means you have to take the focal length of the lens and multiply it by 1.6 in order to get the 35mm equivalent field of view. For example, if I take the 18-55 kit lens, when I multiply by 1.6, I'm actually getting a 29 to 88mm field of view. What that means is that 18mm on this camera is not as wide as an 18mm lens would be on a full-frame sensor camera, but it's the same as a 29mm lens on a full-frame sensor. The important thing here is that you have a lot of options and you're not stuck with a fixed lens. That lets you buy the 90D with maybe only one lens for now, like the 18-55 or the 18-135 kit lenses, but then you continue to build on this camera body with different lenses as your needs change. Moving on, let's talk a little bit about the 1.04 million dot 3-inch fully articulating touchscreen LCD. I love this screen for both photography and video because I'm able to position it just how I want, whether the camera is below or above eye level, or even if I'm positioned to the side. And I'll give you some practical examples. When I need to shoot over a group of people or the camera's on a tripod, I can easily point the screen down all the way to 90 degrees so that I can always very easily frame my shot. If I'm on a slider or photographing from the hip, I can have the screen pointed up. And if I'm doing product photography or working on a gimbal, I can have the screen pointed either side to accommodate different conditions. Finally, if I'm in front of the camera, I can just flip it 180 degrees so that it's facing the front. And now I can see how I'm framed and that the 90D has me in focus. And because I do regularly run across all of these situations, this is something that I very much value in a camera. And at the same time, I can see that not every person uses their camera the way I do. Next, the screen is a full touchscreen. So unlike some brands where you might only be able to use this screen for focus or for focus and quick menu option, but not for the main menu, on the 90D you can control everything using the touchscreen. We use phones and other touch-enabled devices every day, and it's great to be able to use the main menu, the quick menu, change exposure settings, and set focus all using the touchscreen. The screen is nice and bright, and it worked well for me when shooting photos and videos indoor and outdoors. Moving on, I also want to talk about some other features that the 90D has that could help you make a buying decision. First, I want to talk about image stabilization. The 90D does not have in-body image stabilization as far as the sensor is concerned, but it does offer in-body digital image stabilization, and of course, some lenses offer optical image stabilization, which Canon calls IS. While I appreciate having IBIS in the cameras that provide it, it's not something that I really rely on. Cameras are getting better and better in low light, which allows me to raise my ISO a bit if needed, and for video, if I really want stable footage, I'm using a gimbal or a slider. If I want to vlog with the 90D and I'm walking around, I'll probably turn on digital image stabilization, which means that the camera will apply a slight crop to my footage in order to compensate for camera shake. Next, I want to talk about time lapse, and this is something that I absolutely love and use all the time in the Canon cameras that offer it. The 90D offers in-body 1080p and 4K time lapse options, which is a great feature. As usual, Canon made this very simple. You just select the interval in seconds, which is how long you want it to wait between each exposure. You then select how many exposures you want it to take, and this will control how long your final time-lapse video will be. Finally, you select whether you want the 90D to expose for each shot or keep the exposure setting from the first shot and use them for all subsequent shots. What's great about this is that you don't need to take individual photos and then process them yourself in post. When the camera is finished taking pictures, it will compile the time lapse for you and it's ready to be viewed. I would recommend always shooting time lapse in 4K, even if you plan on using it on a 1080p timeline, because you can always resize it, and the larger resolution gives you some cool options in terms of reframing. Next, I want to talk about audio functions, which are another strength of the 90D. On the left side, we see a 3.5mm mic input and a headphone jack. This means that we can connect an external microphone for much better audio quality, as well as headphones to monitor the audio, which is critical for professional work. So here I'm recording directly into the 90D using the built-in microphone. Everything is set on auto. This is a pretty well treated and very quiet room, and this should give you an idea of what you should expect under these conditions. And now I'm recording using the Rode Video Mic Pro Plus. It's connected directly into the camera, no additional preamps. What I am doing is using the plus 20 dB setting on the microphone so that it's boosting the signal, and then I'm able to turn down the gain in the camera so that hopefully there is a much lower noise floor. And again, I hope that this gives you an example and an idea of what the difference is going to be between using an external microphone and a built-in microphone, even in a well-treated room. I'll put some links in the description to a few options that I think would pair up well with the 90D, as well as a microphone comparison video I did to help you choose. I love the fact that Canon is displaying the audio levels on the screen while recording, so you don't have to go into the menu to check levels like on some other lower end models. Finally, and this is really important to me, I can change the gain on the preamp while recording by clicking on the Q menu and then either turning it up or down depending on my situation. It's great to be able to make these adjustments on the fly without having to stop the recording, and you can also change the volume level for the headphones. Let's move on to connectivity. The 90D also has built-in Wi-Fi, which lets you easily pair the camera with a smartphone or tablet so you can wirelessly share images and video. This is awesome for when you're doing a shoot, maybe you took some stills that you quickly want to post to Instagram or Facebook. You can just transfer them to your phone, give them a quick edit or not, and then post them. With Bluetooth, you can both share images and remote control the camera from a mobile device using the Canon Camera Connect app. And this is huge when you're working alone. You can literally use your phone as a remote monitor. There's a slight delay, but it's an awesome feature and one that I use all the time when I'm shooting alone. I love the fact that I can see and change autofocus modes and points on the app, which is something that I haven't been able to do with a lot of other brands. And then finally, for photography, I like to use this feature from macro so I can take a picture without having to touch the camera. Okay, so I would love to know what you think about the 90D. Let me know in the comment section if this is a camera that you would consider getting, and then why or why not. I think the 90D is an excellent option if you're looking for a mid-sized DSLR at this price point that can do a great job for both photography and video. For photography, the 32 megapixel APS-C sensor gave me excellent image quality, and for video, I got very good 4K and outstanding 1080p. Autofocus was good when using the viewfinder and fantastic when using the LCD with the dual pixel autofocus system, and I enjoyed using the face and eye detection when shooting portraits and video. Ergonomics are another strong suit of the 90D. The body is very comfortable to hold, and the buttons and dials are positioned well. I like the new joystick placement, and the fully articulating touchscreen is something that I miss on every camera that doesn't have it. The body is very well built and it offers weather sealing for additional protection. I like that we're getting uncropped 4K video with dual pixel autofocus. I'm happy that Canon decided to add the 24 frames per second for both 1080p and 4K. We have a mic input and a headphone jack for better audio quality and monitoring, and the ability to modify gain and volume levels on the fly. Remote functionality and image transfer is industry leading in terms of speed and functionality, and the battery life is excellent. I also liked having the ability to shoot in-body 4K time-lapse without having to do any post-processing. A few opportunities for improvements here are the limited autofocus coverage in the viewfinder, no ability to charge via USB, lack of autofocus when shooting at 120 frames per second, and the lack of C-Log. The body alone sells for right under $1,200, and I think it's a good value if you're looking for a powerful high-resolution APS-C DSLR. I'll put links in the description to the body as well as some lenses and accessories that I liked because there are always specials and discounts, and the links will automatically be updated with the lowest pricing. I really hope that I was able to give you a good overview of the Canon 90D. If I did, please let me know by giving this video a thumbs up, tweet it, share it, and if you haven't yet, join the community by hitting the subscribe and notification buttons. For more opportunities for live interaction, make sure you find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Tech Gear Talk. You know what I always say, buy it nice or buy it twice. Good luck and see you soon. You ready? I'm ready. Let's go. Why is someone ringing the doorbell? Not people wouldn't even pay attention anyway. Now it's all synced. Are we synced? I think the audio is synced. Can you hear me? I don't even know. Moving on to processor, Canon is that what they're doing? I don't know if that's what they're doing. And then hold the shutter down. That's really slow shutter speed. That was a terrible example. It actually, check out the Canon Mark 6. No, so close. I was so close. I almost got that whole thing. So I selected this. The images were crisp with fairly good. Were they? Camera has that might make. I never in any review get that sentence right.